You think you can take me down, kid? Robert De Niro sneered, his voice dripping with decades of Hollywood arrogance. The Fox News studio was electric, the air thick with tension as the 81-year-old legend glared at 27-year-old White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. Just moments before, he'd called her a Gen Z puppet and mocked her faith on live TV. The crowd had roared, the internet had exploded. This was war. But as the camera zoomed in on Leavitt's icy stare, something unexpected happened. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into the mic and fired back with a line so brutal it left De Niro speechless. The audience gasped. Social media erupted, and in that moment, the political underdog became a legend. How did a young Trump loyalist just dismantle one of Hollywood's most feared giants? The answer will shock you. The atmosphere inside the Fox News studio was electric, charged with the kind of palpable tension that precedes a historic confrontation. Robert De Niro, the legendary actor whose career spanned 6 decades and included some of cinema's most iconic performances, strode onto the stage with the same commanding presence he brought to his most famous roles. At 81 years old, he carried himself like a man who had seen it all, a veteran of Hollywood's golden age, a political firebrand, and a vocal critic of Donald Trump. His reputation preceded him. This was the man who had stood outside Trump's Aldea courthouse, calling him a malignant narcissist, the same man who had spent years using his platform to condemn the former president and his allies. Tonight, he was ready for what he assumed would be an easy victory over a young, inexperienced opponent. Across from him stood Karoline Leavitt, the 27-year-old White House press secretary, a rising star in Trump's inner circle. Dressed in a tailored deep blue suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a polished, no-nonsense style, she exuded a quiet confidence that belied her age. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, studying De Niro's past interviews, his rhetorical tactics, and his vulnerabilities. She knew the liberal media saw her as nothing more than a mouthpiece, a Gen Z puppet, as De Niro had already sneered in pre-show comments. But Leavitt was no pushover. She had clawed her way into Trump's orbit through sheer determination, working her way up from a junior campaign staffer to one of the most visible defenders of the former president's agenda. Tonight, she wasn't just there to defend Trump. She was there to prove that the next generation of conservatives could hold their own against the old guard. The audience was a microcosm of America itself, divided, passionate, and ready for a fight. On one side, MAGA supporters cheered for Leavitt, their voices rising in chants of "Karoline, Karoline." On the other, liberals and De Niro loyalists clapped and whistled, eager to see the Hollywood legend put this young Trump loyalist in her place. The energy was volatile, like a powder keg waiting for a spark. And then the moment arrived. De Niro didn't waste time. The second the cameras rolled, he launched into his attack with the precision of a seasoned performer. His voice, still, rich with the same gravelly intensity that had made him famous, cut through the studio like a knife. "Let's be clear," he began, leaning forward in his seat, his piercing gaze locked onto Leavitt. "Donald Trump is the biggest disaster this country has ever seen. And you?" He gestured dismissively at her. "You're just his latest puppet, a kid who hasn't even lived long enough to understand what real leadership looks like." The liberal side of the audience erupted in applause, some even standing to cheer. De Niro smirked, feeding off their energy. He was in his element. This was the same man who had played ruthless gangsters and hardened detectives, and he knew how to command a room. "You think I'm joking?" he continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "I've spent my life playing guys like Trump in movies, con men, frauds, all flash and no substance. The difference is my characters were fiction. Trump? He's the real deal. And you?" He scoffed. "You're just his lackey, standing there with your little Catholic prayers, pretending you're doing something noble." The jab at her faith was deliberate, a low blow designed to rattle her. The crowd's reaction was immediate, gasps from some, cheers from others. Leavitt's expression remained unreadable, but those closest to the stage could see her fingers tightening around the microphone. Niro wasn't done. "Let's talk about that signal leak," he said, referencing the recent controversy where Leavitt had accidentally exposed White House communications. "You let the world see Trump's plans because you couldn't even handle a simple group chat. So tell me, are you incompetent or just in over your head?" The studio exploded. The liberal side roared with laughter, while MAGA supporters booed loudly. De Niro leaned back, arms crossed, a self-satisfied grin on his face. He had landed every punch exactly as he'd planned. Now, it was Leavitt's turn. For a moment, the studio held its breath. Leavitt didn't react immediately. Instead, she let the noise wash over her, her posture calm, her gaze steady. Then, slowly, she raised the microphone to her lips. "Mr. De Niro," she began, her voice measured, but firm. "I heard everything you just said. And I have to admit, I expected more from a man of your stature." A ripple of surprise ran through the audience. De Niro's smirk faltered slightly. "You call me a puppet," she continued. "You say I'm just a kid reading scripts, but let's talk about you." She turned slightly, nodding to someone off stage. A second later, the massive screen behind them flickered to life, displaying a clip from 2016. There was De Niro, sitting on a CNN panel, grinning as he praised Barack Obama. "I like how Obama handles things," his voice rang out from the speakers. "He's smart. He's got vision." The clip froze. Leavitt turned back to De Niro. "That's you, Mr. De Niro. The same man who now stands here and acts like Trump is the worst thing to ever happen to America. So tell me, who's the real hypocrite?" The MAGA side of the audience erupted in cheers. De Niro's face darkened. He opened his mouth to respond, but Leavitt wasn't finished. "You want to talk about leadership? You spent your career playing tough guys, but in real life, you're just another Hollywood elite who's lost touch with the American people. You live in mansions, dine at your fancy Nobu restaurants, and lecture us about what's best for the country. Meanwhile, I grew up in a middle-class family in New Hampshire. I know what real Americans are struggling with because I've lived it." De Niro tried to interject, but Leavitt raised her voice, cutting him off. "And let's talk about accountability. You mock me over the signal leak. Fine, but what about you? You've spent years calling Trump every name in the book. But have you ever looked in the mirror? You stood outside his courthouse and called him a malignant narcissist. Maybe you should ask yourself, who's the one obsessed with Trump?" The EOS audience was in chaos. The MAGA side was on their feet, chanting her name. Even some of the neutral observers were nodding along, impressed by her composure. De Niro, for the first time in decades, looked rattled. His hands clenched the arms of his chair, his jaw tight. He had come into this debate expecting to dominate. Instead, he was being outmaneuvered by a woman half his age. Leavitt delivered the final blow. "You say I'm just a kid. Maybe I am. But at least I'm not pretending. I believe in what we're doing, making America strong again, securing our borders, rebuilding our economy. And you? What do you stand for besides tearing people down?" The applause was deafening. By the time the E segment ended, the internet was already on fire. Clips of Leavitt's takedown spread like wildfire across social media, with hashtags like "A Karoline crushed De Niro" and "Gen Z vs Boomer" trending within minutes. Memes flooded Twitter and Instagram, De Niro's stunned face photoshopped into scenes. From The Godfather, Leavitt edited into The Wolf of Wall Street with the caption, "She's not leaving." Trump himself weighed in almost immediately, tweeting, "Karoline Leavitt was incredible tonight. De Niro got absolutely destroyed, just like Crooked Joe will in November. Very proud." Conservative commentators hailed her as the future of the her movement, while even some liberal pundits begrudgingly admitted she had outplayed De Niro at his own game. For De Niro, the fallout was brutal. His attempts to regroup on CNN the next day fell flat. His usual fire was gone, replaced by a defensive, almost weary tone. She's clever, I'll give her that, he muttered. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. Overnight, he had gone from untouchable Hollywood legend to a man who had been humiliated on live TV. As for Leavitt, she walked out of the studio that night with her head held high. She hadn't just defended Trump, she had announced herself as a force to be reckoned with. In an era where youth is often dismissed as naive, she had proven that a 27-year-old with conviction, preparation, and sharp instincts could go toe-to-toe with a giant and win. The political world is still buzzing. Will De Niro retreat, or will he seek revenge? Could this moment catapult Leavitt into an even bigger role in Trump's orbit? And most importantly, who would you like to see her debate next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more explosive political showdowns, hit subscribe because this is only the beginning.